All right. So I'm glad the room is filling in a little bit. We were talking up here earlier wondering if everybody had already taken off for the day. So thank you guys for sticking around, much appreciated. As I thought about what I would talk about, it kind of came to me as I was sitting there, and it was just like back in the USSR. That's how I kind of feel like this administration is pushing us. The Biden climate agenda is spreading the misery, and it's putting the cold back in the Cold War. And with that, it's easy for us, and you've been listening to these guys that are way above my pay grade in educational background, but I want to take this and look at it, and I did say, Biden, because those of us who have studied policy long enough, if this isn't Obama on steroids, I'm not sure what is. I wanted just to kind of step this back and look at it, not the trees, but from above, and see the whole big look from above. And so we're going to take a look at that scope of things. Well, how did this all come about? It came about by a single seed, and that single seed was Executive Order 14,008. And that's when this executive order of the whole of government approach to changing and tackling climate crisis, and it's just the DC Leviathan. So what does that mean when they called for the whole of government? So Biden says the government approach. He wants the all of government approach. Well, you start with the EPA. And so every agency was set out by the administration to work on reviewing every regulation in their books. And most of this point made by the administration was, we need to undo the previous administration. So in that, the EPA, first thing they did was they started removing the changes of the procedure for permitting. And so what they've done is, we're not going to use that scientific approach, and we're not going to focus in on one area. We're going to just take it back to the old days where we could make it take years to get a good permit. And so then the Interior Department with the BLM, what did they do? They said, we're going to slow walk. Well, first they came out and said, no federal leases. Well, the tribal lands are federal, and the tribes came unglued on the administration. So they pulled that and said, we'll slow walk the leases. And so when they did that, and I'll get into that a little bit more, the other thing that they're working on is what some of us have termed a 30 by 30, of which is basically land taking. They're back to taking back as much land as they can and turning it into federal lands. Department of Energy, they're moving into the clean energy technology, meaning that they're going net zero by 2050. And they're going to push for that. So the Defense Department, what are they going to do? They're coming in on the procurement process, because everybody has to get involved. And so they're going to push for everything to be moved to low carbon fuels, even in our defense. Now, I really don't want to have to worry about a tank having to be plugged in somewhere or anything. That makes me a little nervous. The Treasury Department, boy, that's a dandy right there. All in on the whole of government approach. She just scares me. And investment, they're going to weigh climate risks against every investment and how it flows. And we've all heard about in the discussion about, if you have you spend $600, they're going to start tracking you and all that. Well, that's her. Agriculture. How are they going to deal with that? Well, all of government has to be involved. Well, we're going to tell our farmers and ranchers they have to reduce the CO2 or they're going to lose their crop insurance. And we have to go after these silly cows that burp up methane and pass gas, and they're just causing us a lot of trouble. So let's eliminate cattle and beef, and we're going to make fake beef instead. Just can't wait to taste that. By the way, I have 400 pounds of beef in my freezer because my sister's a rancher, and I'm not going to not buy and eat good beef. That's good beef. It's not store-bought stuff. If you've tasted the difference, you'll never go back. In education department, well, we're going to flood the education system, and we are going to make sure that the proper awareness is made for all of our students, and we're going to make sure that the bus fleets are all switched to electrical. Justice Department, well, let's get ready for sue and settle. So in that, the executive orders as they came up, and you've heard about all of these things, back in Paris again, and that fight, we'll have that one. WOTUS is back on the table. So if you remember the fights we had with that in the courts, it was finally won and decided, and now it's back on the table, and that is destruction of the agricultural in our country. And so one of the other things that the previous administration had done is that they had moved the regional BLM managers out into the fields so that they could actually be working with the people they were regulating. Nope, not anymore. We need everybody back in DC as bureaucrats. We can't have you working with the people. So what does that do? This agenda is now increasing, destabilizing, crippling, and going to increase our dependency on foreign oil. Increases, they're going to come at the hands of our grandparents, and it's going to cost them higher fuel and cooling and food costs. The poor and the elderly will be hit the hardest, and they will suffer the most. So in that, storage, this is dealing with the grid, trying to store any kind of fuel, everything's going to become unreliable, pushing for the great times of lack of food, lack of gas. Sound familiar? We're heading into winter. Now, some of you may not live where I do. I live in North Dakota. I'm concerned about not having my fuel available to me. Grid disruptions, grid destabilization. These are big deals when it's 20 below. Some of you guys don't understand that. When it's 120 degrees, do you want your air conditioner and lights turned off? Same thing. More elderly die from the heat than they do the cold. So it affects all of us all along. The methane rules are going to cause major heating and fuel and nat gas shortages and increases in prices, and we're already seeing that. There is a call for nat gas from this administration right now because they know they're going into the winter with low amounts. And so with that, the future of the grid, I know was just alluded to, the mini grids and things like that. Well, that would be the way to go. But instead, we have former FERC directors and commissioners that are calling for the one group, the FERC, gets to control all the grids. Now that's what I like, centralized bureaucracy in DC. It's always proven to be such a good way to do it. Those who sat through the previous thing learned a lot about the ESG, and boy, that was a good one. And if you didn't hear that panel, I would ask that you maybe take the time and get on the YouTube and listen to it. They were brilliant speakers. But with ESG, it's just meant to cripple our economy. And it's going to stop investment in infrastructure across the United States. That is true. It's part of the statements so Bank of America, go on their website, take a look at their mission statements. Flat out says that they are going to prohibit businesses with coal-fired plants and expansion or existence of them. Take them at their word. They've written it in their mission statement. They will not fund anything, and they will penalize anybody who's a part of it. Another way that this is happening is with Lloyd's, the largest insurance company in the world. They have stated by January 1st of 2022 that they plan to end all investments and or provide any new insurance for those in coal-fired power plants, mines, exploration, and they will be net zero by 2025 in their investment areas and who they insure. And they will phase out all renewed of existing insurance policies that deal with these issues or these areas of that they don't like by 2030. So good luck, farmers. Good luck, energy companies. You will not be able to be insured. In speaking with our coal companies, they have said their insurance rates have been raised almost every quarter for the last couple years. So it's already starting, they're already doing it. So with that, this is more at the heart of things for me, energy issues for a state like North Dakota where we produce everything but nuclear. I tried as a legislator to try get a little mini nuclear plant a couple of times, but we just couldn't get it done. So BLM, one of the least desired 3 letters in the state of North Dakota, they have decided to suspend leasing of 3/4 of the leases in North Dakota. So they're shutting down energy in North Dakota. We were the second largest producer. We are now dropped to third, and they're making it extremely difficult. They are slow walking and stopping all of the permits. And then we turn around and so this administration says, stop doing the permits. And then they turn around and say, hey, OPEC, can we have some oil? And OPEC laughs at them. And so now they're saying, came out, I think it was yesterday or just today, hey, local, you guys in the shale business, could you guys drill a little bit here because we're heading into winter now and the slowdown's affecting things, asking us to lower the price of oil and gas in the U.S. Well, that's a really interesting thing ask from the administration today after you just shut down all the permits. And North Dakota's going into winter, you don't go in and start ramping up fracking and pulling gas. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how that goes. The reason why this is interesting too, if anybody, North Dakota is one of the few states in the nation where the mineral leases are owned by private people. So if I own the land, I own the minerals below it. And that's how North Dakota was. But during the 30s, when the Dust Bowl came through and a lot of people had to give up their land and the federal government took over, when that land came back to the people and they purchased their lands back, the federal government kept half of the mineral rights under each of these little pockets. So if you ever had a chance to look at the checkerboard of North Dakota, a fairly square state, and the western portion has a very large oil reserve under it. And so you'll take, your acreages out and then you start dividing down the divisions, and I don't want to get into all the little intricate things of the acreages, but under each of these there's little teeny parts that the federal government just owns, these little teeny percentages all over the place. So if you're going to do, and you see how this is laid out with the rigs all in a line on one big square area. So what that is when they're doing a layout of, okay, this is an area that's going to be drilled. These are spacing units. And so that spacing unit is sitting there, and they run all of these, they stack all these pumper jacks right down the line. And under each one of those, they're going down 2 miles, and then they're shooting straight out for 2 miles. And then they can go down, and when they're done with that one, they can move it over a little bit, they shoot it down, go 2 miles that way. And when they get in there, then they pump that in and they frack it out, and the oil comes out, right? Well, when you're going 2 miles, what happens is a spacing unit is 4 sections out of land. And I hope you guys understand what I'm saying on the sections of land. And so in those sections, that line's going to go under there. Well, as that is shooting out those 2 miles, this is privately owned, this might be owned by the state, and then the federal government owns that little tip over there. Little 6% of this 2-mile line. Nope, can't frack that line now. Touched federal land. Can't get the permits anymore. In doing that, they stopped, in the month of July, 3,443 wells from being able to be fracked. Just shutting everything down, because the oil formation lays in these spacing units of how it can come out of the ground. So 24% of the units are touched by federal land in the spacing units, so that's the percentage that just went off the ground, off untouchable now, until we can get back to a proper permitting system like we were at before. North Dakota is privately owned, as I said, of the mineral rights. 85% of the minerals are owned by private citizens. 9% is federal. That's split between a 5 and a 4 with the tribe. And so just that little percentage can shut down the whole works. That's a taking of the federal government for those of us who own private minerals who no longer can get that access. So, where am I going with this? What do we do? Okay, we lay out the scenario. We've been through this before. We were with it with the previous administration. So what are we going to do? How do we address this? I can't do a slide presentation without my babies with me. So, what we're going to do, what I'm going to just talk about is just some quick action items that can be done. Okay, states need to step up. This is a federalism issue. This is something that you can deal with. Work with your state legislators. This is where you, as the previous speakers had talked about the ESG, you need to pass anti-ESG legislation. There's ways to do it. There's model legislation out there that others, multiple states have tried and done. With that, build coalitions among the states. It was talked about from the Alaska governor and all the way down to the Texas governor and everybody in between. We need to all work together as a state, whether it's the governors, whether it's the attorney generals, whether it's the legislators working on coalitions across. State think tanks need to work together. If you know your state think tank, get to them, ask them what they're doing, tell them how to work on something. Reach out to the large think tanks. Talk to us in the government relations of Heartland, and we can direct you where you need to go if we are not holding the piece of legislation that you're looking for. Next part, Congress has to grow a set. They need to take back their constitutional authority. This is really getting old. We elect them to go out there to do a job, and we need to hold every single one of them accountable to do their job. They have sworn that they will uphold their Constitution, uphold your authority. Push back on every one of these things through Congressional Review Act. Yes, we don't have the majorities to stop it at times, but it at least makes the point, and it gets it on the table. One that I thought was a real great piece of legislation that was put in North Dakota was critical infrastructure protection. If anybody was following a few years ago when we had what was called DAPL, it's the name of a pipeline that was being built and put through in North Dakota, and major protests came in, world drops on the little barren piece of North Dakota to shut down this pipeline. Thankfully, the previous administration, day one, said, clear them out. We're putting the pipeline in the ground. The pipeline is full. It's working. It's great. It's expanding. They're trying to protest it again, but the full expansions are going there. That critical infrastructure, if you have protection for it, those protests can't destroy the equipment like they did on these protests. They were in the lines. You didn't know what was going to happen next. It was a disaster. The same thing just happened on Line 3 in Minnesota, it took forever, and the protesters were destroying things, and it's terrible. It's scary for everybody because it's life and death when they start messing with these structures. And so we put in some protections like that, and you should ask your states to do the same. And get your attorney generals involved. Talk to your legislators. Make sure they are funding their attorney generals so that they can join in and be together on these multi-state joined lawsuits. Our state, North Dakota, we are right in the throes of the BLM issue that I was talking about on permitting. That is a lawsuit into the courts. They've joined in with Louisiana and I think 15 other states. So that is a very important thing that is the only way to do it, because it is the way the multi-states can start pushing back for federalism. Stand up to the federal overreach, because we need to protect our citizens and our taxpayers and our assets. So of that action item, one of the things that North Dakota, another thing that I would say is that you need to talk with your, we call them PSC, but PUC, your utility regulators. Make sure that they start asking the right questions. They need to hold the utility customers to that reliability that they promise, safety for their ratepayers, and hold them accountable for their ratepayers. The duties for our century code, it's clear, and so they have been reminded of that. And in that, the North Dakota PSC has started asking the questions. It was discussed in one of their latest hearings. They asked the SPP CEO, what are you doing about stability? And he answered back, and I think that was in a slide back a ways. I apologize. See if we can get to, there it was. His answer back was, we do need to step up. We do need to show some real leadership in determining the assets. And so what he actually admitted that the people at the SPP were not dealing with or following whether or not what the utility companies were doing added stability to the grid that they're responsible to oversee. So that was a great piece where now they're going to start asking those right questions. North Dakota's PSC are going to hold them accountable. Also, in the other portion here, the federal FERC was asked whether or not that, so MISO, and I hope you guys all know your grids and which grids you're under, but MISO, we asked them, can we have a vote on this to weigh in on our issues, And so we have a coalition I'm a part of. I also, one of the things that I also am, I'm a CEO of a think tank like Amy, and I have the Rough Rider Policy Center in North Dakota. And so along with a few other think tanks and the lignite industry and others, we have joined together to protect the taxpayers and the ratepayers on this. And so we're saying we need a vote on whether or not you guys are following along to make sure you're protecting the grid and the ratepayers. And they have agreed to give us a voice, which is a big deal. It was really exciting when that just happened in like the last week. So with that, we'll flip forward really quick. So I did have on the slides there just some other resources, things I had looked at, and if you want some more of that information, just let me know. But so I would just say in conclusion that we can see all of this, and some of you are going to look at it and think the sun is setting on the United States. And I would just say that, that it may look like we are back in the USSR in our way of life, but if you know me at all, am the ultimate optimist, and I see everything as a sun rising. I see renewal, I see revival, and I see that we still have great things on our horizon. And I don't know if anybody can tell the difference between the sunrise or the sunset there, but they're from my land, and I am a sunrise person. I'm out on my land early in the day, and the one where my flowers, and they don't show up very well on the big screen, but my flowers is my sunrise, and with the trees in the far back where you see the brighter sun coming up is a sunset right off our back porch. And I love watching the sunrise every morning. It is what sets my optimism for the day, and I hope you will do the same in looking for the optimism. Thank you.